The Longship slid through the cold morning sea like a living thing, its narrow hull rising and falling with a steady, patient rhythm. Mist clung to the water, turning the horizon into a pale blur where sky and ocean became one. The dragon head at the prow stared forward with a carved snarl, daring the waves to challenge it. This was the sea wolf, and for the men aboard sat along the starboard side, knees pulled close, fingers numb from the chill. This was only his third day at sea, and already his body ached in ways he hadn't known were possible. Salt crusted his beard, his wool tunic never fully dried. Every movement of the ship reminded him how small he was against the ocean. Yet what troubled him most wasn't the cold or the fear of storms. It was the question he hadn't dared to ask until now. The ship carried more than 20 men. They ate, slept, sweated, vomited, and relieved themselves on a deck barely wide enough to lie flat. Eric had grown up on a farm where waste had its place. Pits dug far from the well, routines learned from childhood. Here, there were no walls, no privies, no hiding place. And yet none of the men seemed sick. No one retched endlessly. No one clutched their stomach in pain. No foul stench lingered in the air. The ship smelled of salt, wet wood, tar, and iron, harsh but clean. Finally, Eric leaned toward Hrafen, the steersman, whose hands never seemed to leave the great oar that guided the ship. "Hrafen," he muttered, keeping his voice low. "What do we do when nature calls?" Hrafen didn't look at him. A crooked smile tugged at his beard. "We listen to it, and we answer quickly." Eric frowned. "But where does it go?" Hrafen finally turned, blue eyes sharp but amused. He hooked a thumb toward the rolling sea. "There." As if summoned by the word, a sailor rose from his bench, stepped calmly to the side, and relieved himself over the gunwale without ceremony. The ship rolled. The wave took everything instantly. No mess, no lingering smell, just sea and wind. Eric stared. "That's it?" "That's it," Hrafen said. "The sea is deep, deeper than any pit you've ever dug, and it doesn't give sickness back." As the morning wore on, Eric began to notice the rules, unspoken but strictly followed. Nothing was allowed to remain. When a man finished eating dried fish, the bones were flicked overboard. A scrap of bread that had gone soft with moisture was tossed away without regret. A pot that smelled even slightly wrong was emptied into the waves. Food was precious, but sickness was deadlier. Freshwater barrels were kept sealed tight, lashed securely near the center of the ship. Only certain men were allowed to open them, and always with clean hands. Eric watched one sailor rinse his hands in seawater, scrub them with sand until the skin reddened, and only then reach for the ladle. "What's wrong with just wiping them on your tunic?" Eric asked quietly. The sailor glanced at him, expression serious now. "What you can't see can still kill you." That answer stayed with him. The Vikings didn't know the word bacteria, but they knew the truth of it. A ship where waste lingered became a floating grave. They had learned this through bitter memory. Voyages where half a crew never reached shore, not because of enemies, but because of sickness born from filth. Here, discipline kept them alive. The open design of the Longship was no accident. Wind swept constantly across the deck, drying moisture, carrying away foul air. There was no dark, sealed belly where rot could fester. Even the sleeping arrangements followed this logic. Men lay beneath the open sky or thin covers, breathing cold, clean air rather than trapping their own breath in damp spaces. By mid-morning, the sun broke through the mist. Light glimmered on wet planks. A sailor knelt near the mast, scrubbing a sticky spill with seawater and a rough cloth. He worked until the wood no longer smelled. "Why bother?" Eric asked. "The next wave will wash it anyway." The man snorted. "And until then, flies will find it. Then sickness will find us." Eric nodded slowly. Each answer fit into a growing picture. This was not carelessness. It was control. When Eric himself finally felt the urgent pull of his body, panic rose in his chest. But the process was simple. He waited for a calm moment, followed another sailor to the side, held fast to a rope, and let the sea claim what it wanted. Embarrassment vanished quickly in the cold wind. What remained was relief, and the strange comfort of knowing the problem was gone forever. No pits to overflow, no waste to step in, no poison lingering beneath their feet. As the ship cut onward, Eric realized something profound. The Seawolf was clean, not because it was scrubbed spotless, but because nothing stayed long enough to rot. The ocean was their latrine, their drain, their purifier. Harsh, yes, but endlessly effective. When evening approached, the crew prepared a simple meal. Dried fish was softened in broth. Hard bread was shared. Everything eaten could last weeks without spoiling. Anything that didn't was thrown away without hesitation. Eric chewed slowly, watching gulls wheel overhead, following the ship for scraps. He felt tired, sore, and salt stung, but not sick. Not even a little. As the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, he finally understood why these men could sail for weeks, even months, without falling apart. Their strength didn't come from ignoring filth, but from respecting it. Waste was treated like an enemy, swiftly expelled, never allowed to gather strength. And as long as the sea surrounded them, sickness would never find a place to stay. The storm announced itself before it arrived. The wind changed first, sharp and restless, snapping the sail like an angry hand. The sky darkened from gray to iron, and the horizon vanished beneath a wall of rolling water. The Seawolf no longer sliced through the sea with grace. She fought it, shuddering as each wave slammed against her hull. Eric tightened his grip on the rope, knuckles white. Rain fell in hard, stinging sheets, soaking every scrap of wool and leather within moments. The deck became a slick, shifting surface where a single careless step could mean death. "Hold fast!" came the shout from the bow. The crew moved with practiced urgency. Oars were secured. The sail was reefed. Every man knew his place, and fear was swallowed in the rhythm of survival. This was not the first storm these men had faced, nor would it be the last. But storms brought more than danger from the sea. They brought sickness. Weeks trapped on a longship, unable to follow the routines that kept them clean, had killed men in the past. Eric had heard those stories back on shore. Crews weakened by fever, stomach sickness spreading like fire, warriors too weak to lift a shield when land finally came into view. Yet the men of the Seawolf did not panic. Even as waves crashed over the gunwales, their discipline did not break. When a sailor doubled over, gripping his stomach, 2 others were at his side instantly. A wooden bucket was brought forward, plain, scarred by years of use. It was not elegant, but it was essential. "Here," Hrafen said calmly. "Use it, don't spill." The man retched into the bucket, rain and sea spray mixing with what his body rejected. The smell was sharp, but it did not linger. The bucket was covered and set aside, secured with rope. Eric stared. "We're keeping it on board?" "Only until the sea allows otherwise," Hrafen replied. "The rule doesn't change just because the sky is angry." Hours passed in a blur of wind and water. The ship rose and fell violently, creaking like a living creature under strain. Men took turns bailing water, muscles burning, breath ragged. Wet clothes clung to skin, heavy and cold. This was where sickness usually took root. Cold weakened the body. Dampness invited lice and infection. Exhaustion dulled judgment. But the Vikings had learned to fight these invisible enemies as fiercely as they fought any foe. When the rain eased for even a moment, cloaks and tunics were stripped off and hung along the rigging. The wind whipped them hard, stealing moisture away. "Better to freeze for an hour than rot for a week," one sailor muttered as he worked with bare arms. Eric followed their lead, teeth chattering as the cold bit into his skin. But when he pulled the tunic back on later, it felt lighter, cleaner. The relief was immediate. Food was handled with the same care. No cooking was attempted in the worst of the storm. Instead, the crew ate what required no fire. Hard bread and dried fish, tough but safe. Anything that had been soaked too long or smelled wrong was thrown away without debate. "Waste hurts less than weakness," Hrafen said when Eric hesitated over a soggy ration. Even the bucket was not forgotten. When the storm briefly calmed and the ship rode lower in the water, Hrafen himself took it, crawled to the side, and emptied it into the churning sea. The contents vanished instantly, claimed by the waves. The bucket was rinsed with seawater, scrubbed with sand, and set back in its place. Clean again. Night fell with no stars, only darkness and the roar of the ocean. The men did not sleep so much as collapse in turns, wedged against shields and chests. No one crowded below deck. No one sealed themselves away from the air. Eirik lay on his back, rain striking his face like cold needles. His muscles trembled with exhaustion, yet his head was clear, his stomach steady. He realized then that sickness thrived on stillness. On land, filth hid in corners. On ships that trapped air, rot festered unseen. But here, everything moved: wind, water, people. Nothing stayed long enough to become dangerous. By dawn the storm broke. The sky lightened, and the sea, though still rough, no longer seemed intent on destroying them. The men rose slowly, stretching aching limbs. Faces were haggard, eyes red, but there was no fever among them, no groans of illness. They worked immediately. The deck was rinsed with seawater. Anything that had been fouled was scrubbed clean. Wet bedding was aired. The water barrels were checked for contamination. Hands were washed again and again, skin raw but safe. Eirik watched the ritual unfold with new respect. This was not superstition. It was survival knowledge passed from one generation to the next, carved as deeply into these men as their scars. When land finally appeared, a dark line against the pale sky, a low cheer rippled through the crew. Eirik felt a surge of pride he hadn't expected. He had endured the storm. He had learned the rules. Hrafn clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You did well." "I didn't do much," Eirik replied. Hrafn smiled. "You listen, that's enough." As the sea wolf surged toward shore, Eirik understood the truth behind the stories. Vikings didn't survive long voyages because they were fearless. They survived because they were clean in the only way that mattered, relentless, practical, and unforgiving of waste. On a ship where everything could kill you, even sickness was treated like an enemy. And like every other enemy, it was thrown into the sea.